going to open it up to discussion. I think it's really interesting the way in which everyone was speaking to a real tension between a question of belonging and possibility and an anxiety about domestic security and what the downsides of that sense of what domestic security might enforce upon us. So it's really interesting how it played out there. So let's start over here.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm going to address it to Henry, but there's a correlation between what Henry said and what Susan said that I thought was fascinating. First of all, your comment about burning the flag, that was really dramatic. I don't know if I agree with it, but I thought it was really dramatic. So my question is, a lot of communities, whether they're black or Latino or Asian, like to have some visible manifestation of community. Now, I guess, is your problem with the flag its height and its prominence? I mean, supposing you had 300 little flags on storefronts, would that be different?
I have a lot of problems with that flag. First of all, the symbol itself, the rainbow, has never made a lot of sense to me. I don't think it captures anything meaningful about this community, and I think it attempts to resolve all of the sort of tensions and difficulties and longings that we've expressed in a kind of cartoon of niceness, and I've always hated the symbol. Secondly, the size of that flag. I mean, in a city that is, constantly trying to chop down important new buildings because they're too big. It's like the biggest flag I've ever seen, and actually completely doesn't relate to physically as an object to the scale of its context of that area of Market Street or the landscape or the Castro as a place. And so I think it's the aggressiveness of that flag that I feel so aggressive towards. And also I think it represents a moment in our evolution where we've adopted very normalizing, very mainstream attitudes and values. We demand a space that is ours, rather than a moment in the past, or hopefully a moment in the future, where we understand ourselves in a kind of critical or radical dialogue with normative codes that surround us.
I'm wondering if Joy, considering that Rainbow Vision is clearly articulating sort of a very different perspective on the concept of rainbow and possibility, if you might be interested in responding to that.
I actually have a comment about the flag. It's, I think that it's very important for us to make sure the options exist. No one is forcing anyone to do anything about it. In other words, you don't have to live near a flag if you don't want to. But let me tell you about this story about the flag, because I just went through this big scenario with this same damn flag. And I'm saying that because at Rainbow Vision, there were 3 flags. 2 of them said leasing, and one of them was the rainbow flag. The city came by a week ago and said, you only have a temporary permit, and we consider those flags signage. You have to have a permanent permit. So we had to take down the flags. So what? Oh, so what? I got a big article in the newspaper how Rainbow Vision was no longer gay, and how could we do that, and they were losing their home. I mean, this was like, I was a resident. A resident went to the newspaper, and everybody stopping me in the street about this damn article. Now, it turns out the city, of course I say, was wrong about taking this particular flag down, because the flag is not signage. It is a symbol, like people who put up a peace flag, or missing people in the army, or the Mexican flag, the new Mexican flag. I mean, the American flag, which is also a symbol of a moment of war, stars and stripes forever. We don't go with that. But the thing is, this flag was so important, and they thought we took it down, and they were freaked out because they came to this community by design, because they came from all over. You know, they didn't come from the places where they had a choice about, well, we can move from metropolitan area to metropolitan. And they were also trying to find each other after a certain age. So, being integrated and not having that, it was just that important. Now, I would have never thought that this was that big a deal because I was putting it back up. It was, it was just the city. But I wasn't even given the opportunity to say, I didn't take that flag down. Nor would I do that because and they started putting flags on their homes at this point. Which they're not allowed to do by the covenants, but without having a discussion with each other. Okay, which goes back to the, I'm going to move to utopia and everybody's going to think just like me thing. You have to sit down and you have to say, how do you feel about us doing this? But, we haven't really gotten to that place where we can have those kind of discussions in a fashion where we don't think somebody's doing something to us. And I think that goes back to the trust factor. Somebody is doing something to us. We're still in that, it's a certain part of ourselves is in that moment. And so it was a shock to find this information out. So I think the important thing is to keep creating, keep bringing it to the table. Not destroy, but create things that work and to work it out with the people that we're in relationships with. And I think the relationships is what creates the community, those relationships.
Thank you. Wow, I can only imagine the ire that everyone had. Confession. I was actually there the day that we hoisted that flag, and I was one of about 10 different pairs of hands that actually boosted it up. And have you visited? I don't know if you've actually visited. I know it's kind of daunting, especially when it's windy and that thing is flapping in the air and makes all kinds of noise. I can hear it from my house. And at the base of it is really a monument. And on that monument is an inscription of those of us who were either elected or appointed to seats after some of the horrific events of the Lavender scourge that basically had happened. So some pretty traumatic events. I hear what you're saying, and it would be risky, I think, to really entertain in some respects the idea of demolishing the flag. I think that this is a good example. But all I can say, I just wanted to say, just to add my little 2 cents, is that I was there the day that we put that flag up there. And there seemed to be 2 times, we're talking about sort of spatial relationships. There's a time, seemingly, and this is not to nostalgicize anything or over-romanticize things, but the esteem of our community for all that it had been through and all that it has stood for. And I'm just a junior member. Even when I say I've lived here for 15 years, believe me, I'm well aware I'm just a junior league member here. But the esteem of the community seemed to have, for me, been witnessed in 2 parts. The day before and the day after that flag went up. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody rallied around it and we all loved it. It was big, it was huge, it was kind of scary. But at the same time, too, it does have historical context that really, I think, again, celebrated a particular moment where we weren't represented as well for all of the great feats of Harvey Milk and Carol Migden and Roberta Ackenberg and others. This basically, I think, did say to us that it's not like, well, we've arrived because we planted our flag on the moon, but I think that people did feel a different sense of cohesion and community, and I think that there's something meaningful about that. I understand what you're saying, because one could, if you took it to the really radical extreme, it's like the Confederate flag. For some, when you're talking about flags, people